Now, the thing with database servers is that they are not very useful without databases. I don't know if you've noticed that. So we have our system databases, but of course we want to be hosting our own databases. So we're going to be taking a look at how we can create our databases. So to do this, obviously we need the privileges. We've already mentioned that our root account, the database root account, has full privileges. So we can log in. It doesn't really matter which database that we go to. We can create our database sales. It's always going to be at the top level. So even if I'm in the MySQL database, it is going to create a top level database called sales. Now, a database then is used to aggregate other objects such as views, procedures, and mainly tables. But we are not going to be looking at that side of things. We just want to get our database created at the moment. We can list our databases as we saw before with the show databases command. And then we're done and dusted with that. Next up will be to create database users. We've got our root account, but we don't want to use that for every connection, and it is limited to the local host because of the Unix socket authentication. So we can go through again, making sure that we've authenticated as our database root user. And if we start listing the users that we have, so we can select user and host, these are the columns that we want, from our user table, where host is not equal to localhost. As part of our username, we also build in a host name. If our host is localhost, we can only log in from literally the local host. If it's %, we can log in from any host. We want to create a new user. We're creating a user called Bob. We separate the user from the network using the @ symbol. And then we're specifying that they are only able to log in from our 192.168.56.0 network. Now, obviously, that's the network that we're using, but if you're using a different network, make sure you're assigning to the correct network. We're using password authentication, so we can say identified by the password, but obviously you can use any password that you want. We can then go through and relist our users, so the user and host columns from our user table, where the host is not equal to localhost, and obviously we're expecting now to see our Bob account. We can then exit, and then we can use the MySQL. This time we don't need to worry about sudo, but specify the host, so 192.168.56.102, so the address of our Ubuntu 2 system, where the user account is Bob. And we can use -p without a password and it will prompt, but you can, for ease, put the password in directly after the lowercase p so you're not going to be prompted. Now, we can do this from both Ubuntu 2, but also it would be an idea to install the MariaDB client on Ubuntu 1 to ensure that we are properly testing across the network. So whilst this is good, if our user tries to access the sales database, it's going to fail. It doesn't have privileges to the sales database, so we need to grant privileges. We can go through making sure that we are the root account, and then we can grant all privileges. Now, we don't have to grant all, but we can grant select or whatever privileges that we feel are necessary. On the sales.*, so the sales database and all objects. We don't have any objects in there, but any objects that will be created will inherit them from the sales database. To Mo, so we're creating a new user. Again, on the same subnet and identified by a password. Notice here that we're granting privileges to a user that doesn't exist, but it's going to create the user as well. We could also grant privileges to our existing Bob account by then just using to Bob at and then the same network address. We just don't need the identified by password if we are using an existing account. We can exit and then test our connectivity and check that we can actually get into the sales database. So as Mo will be able to get into the sales database, but as yet we haven't assigned any privileges to Bob, so Bob won't be able to get into the sales database. But it's shown then the story of creating our database, creating our users, and assigning privileges. Now, of course, we need to get some hands-on experience, and that's exactly what we're going to do in our next clip.